beautiful, sexy, outstandingly gorgeous people. This is Zac Cupples from ZacCupples.com, and I bring you a episode on the Zac Cupples Show, which is kind of the unofficial podcast, or it's official podcast that I launched a little while back to categorize my movement debriefs for people who like the audio versions a little bit better. And so I decided that since I probably won't be putting out a debrief this week, and with good reason, I'm going to be on vacation, and where I'm going, I don't think I'm going to have much internets. I definitely won't have enough internets to live stream video, so this will be a close second. And I'm thinking I will occasionally put out these podcasts just to, when I have some type of thought that maybe is better served talking through as opposed to in writing or in debriefing. So, welcome. Before we get it too far into the topic, please guys, make sure you check out All Gain No Pain. It's a wonderful book that Bill Hartman wrote. You can download it on Amazon. I think by the time this goes out, it'll be $4.99 on Amazon. And I had the pleasure of writing the foreword, which you can read on this week's blog, ZacCupples.com. Check that out. And I also edited the book. And obviously, I have my biases because of that. But it really, I cannot think of a better resource for someone who wants to train either while they're in pain or post-pain. And if you are a trainer or coach or a physical therapist, you're going to get a lot out of it. Not whether it's your understanding of how the stress response works, or whether it's learning how to produce intensity in someone who is maybe just getting out of pain. So please get that book, fam. So that's that. On to the topic. So today's topic was inspired by a gentleman on YouTube named Rhinoceros Rex. I think that is his actual first name. He was asking me a couple questions regarding physical therapy school, and I get these questions a lot from people on PT school. So I kind of want to, if I had to do it over again, or let's say I was being a physical therapist now, I kind of want to answer this question. What are the things you want to do leading up to that point, or like how to make the most out of physical therapy school? And so let's dive in. The first thing that I want to talk about in that regard is making sure you want to be a physical therapist. This is something that, I'm a trainer and I think PT would be cool because I want to train professional athletes. You don't always get that opportunity, and many of the opportunities that you do get are not that great. A lot of the outpatient orthopedic clinics now, especially if you want to live in a bigger city, is it's kind of a patient mill. You're going to see a lot of patients per hour. I had a buddy who was working in the Phoenix area who was seeing 3 or 4 an hour. And it's really hard to give good quality care in those places. Not only that, but if you do want to work in outpatient in that type of setting, the pay's not always that great. And so these are things you have to be mindful of. It's not, if you're going to go into physical therapy, it's not a moneymaker by any means. And you have to realize that a lot of the settings and scenarios that are dictated by insurance, and who knows where it's going to go with all the changes that will be forthcoming in the next, probably our lifetime, you don't really know what good care is going to look like, or if you'll be able to give good care, unless you maybe open up your own practice, or if you're like me and you get lucky and you travel in a rural area and get time with patients. Because I think time is by far the most important factor to try to preserve if you want to be a good physical therapist. And I'll talk a little bit about money too because this is going to be important with your decision to going into physical therapy school. So first off, make sure you're not doing it for the money, because it's not there. If you're going to do a job for the money, like in terms of bang for your buck, I would definitely think about PA. But first off, even before that, don't go into healthcare just because of money. Like, do something else, invent something, and make a lot of money that way. That's neither here nor there, though, because I feel like a lot of the people who wanted to go into this because it pays well end up not continuing their education, continuing to get themselves better, a lot of these other things. So please do this for the right reasons, and it's just because you want to help people, and you want to help people through the movement. So now back to the money thing. That said, right, we don't always make that much money. And so let's say you're deciding to go to PT school. First off, please be really understanding your basic sciences that you're taking in undergrad, because it's going to be immensely helpful when you have to take a lot of those in graduate school. So if you are an undergrad right now, work hard, understand that stuff, because it is important. I find myself continuing to go back to those things, back to reviewing anatomy, back to reviewing physiology throughout the course of my career, and it's something I personally probably didn't emphasize as much as I should have. So please do that. Now that you're going to PT school, my first criteria for deciding where to go, number one, is it cheap? You're roughly going to get the same education just about everywhere. Some places are going to be a little bit better than others. But you have to understand, there's this wonderful thing called compound interest with your student loans. That is a killer. And I went to a private school, and I think I left with about 99. And unfortunately, from a lot of my friends, that's the low end of things. You want way less than that, because I can tell you right now, 99K at 6.5 to 7.5% interest is brutal. Like, you have to put down a lot of money, and it's one of the reasons why I'm traveling. Aside from I don't know where the hell I want to live, but I mean, it's an astronomical amount to be paying each month, and will limit potential opportunities you could take, and will limit your freedom. So please go out of PT school as unscathed as you can. That's number one. Number two I would look at is, how soon can you get out? And one school that I'm pushing people towards, I don't know much about it other than it satisfies both of these criteria, is South College. And it's an online program. I believe a lot of the evidence in motion people have helped put this together, but you can get out in 2 years, and it looks to be fairly reasonably priced. And because you have those two big things in your favor, like I almost tell everyone who's thinking about PT school, please check out South College. And again, I have no affiliation with them. It's just I want you guys to leave physical therapy school in a better situation than myself or many of my colleagues are in. So, number one is go somewhere cheap. Number two is go somewhere where you can get out quickly. The third thing, and this is very, very important, and I may even say that the other two, you may fluff a little bit from those if you don't get this one, but be able to pick your clinical sites. You want to make sure that you have the capability to be able to select a mentor that you want to learn from. For example, although the school that I went to was expensive, it did get me out fast. It was a 2.5-year program, which was very cool. And it also let me pick my clinicals. And I was very fortunate to be able to do a clinical affiliation with Daddy-O Pops Bill Hartman. And I can't think of any experience in my life, at least in the past 10 years, that was more impactful than that. Because having his mentorship and guidance, and I still have it to this day, because we're very good friends, and he unofficially adopted me. was critical because it expedited my learning curve to such a high degree because I was able to learn from all of his mistakes, and he is a brilliant clinician. So I got to learn his ways, his style. I got to be exposed to his network, which has allowed me to meet and interact and help a lot of great people. And I'm forever indebted because of that. But I know a few cats who went to a unnamed PT school who didn't have that luxury, who couldn't choose their clinical affiliation sites. And they, because of that, and because they couldn't pick the mentors that they wanted, and not only that, but it's very hard to evaluate what makes a good clinical instructor versus not as a physical therapy school. They didn't have the best of experiences. They were stuck in patient mills. And I've seen that multiple times. I've seen that in my PT school with individuals who didn't seek out these, setting up their own sites. So that is a really underrated piece to consider when you're attending PT school. So the 3 keys before you even get there, 4 keys. 1, be killing it in undergrad. Learn your basic sciences. Number 2, go somewhere cheap. Number 3, go somewhere you can get out quickly. And number 4, make sure you can pick your clinical sites. And that's, regardless of your outpatient, your neuro, your acute care, whatever. You want to pick some places that are good. But those are the 4 keys before you even get to PT school. And that will lead you to selecting a very successful program. Now, I'm not going to get into how to ace interviews and stuff like that, because I'm not the best at it by any means. And I will be working on that process, but that's probably going to be either in a later blog post or in a later debrief where I'll kind of talk about getting the dream job. But that will apply to this. But so let's say you got into PT school, you're ready to learn, you're ready to get after it. What do you do then? One interesting point that Rhinoceros Rex brought up was, I don't feel like I'm learning anything, in the sense that a lot of the treatments that you will be exposed to will be outdated. For example, I learned about ultrasound when I was in PT school, and I think even at that time period, there wasn't much evidence to support its utilization. And so what you have to understand going into PT school, if you are one of these people who maybe has spent a great deal of time learning a lot of cool things, or you see like, Zac is taking all these cool classes, or man, everyone's talking about this, I want to learn that as well. And I think that's great. I think it's very cool that there's some students out there who want to take initiative, who want to go to continuing education classes while they're in school, and I will definitely encourage that. What I will discourage is holding that against your PT school, because you have to look at it from their standpoint. And what is their goal? In order to be a successful business, because that is what it is a business. In order to be a successful business, and that means bringing students in continually, they have to get their people, their students, to pass the test. That's the goal. And unfortunately, a lot of the concepts on that test are outdated. And you may have to learn things that you may think, man, this is garbage. I definitely have learned many of those things while I was in PT school. But here's where I have to challenge you guys who maybe are in PT school and are in this boat. The first thing I want to say is make sure you don't take what you're learning in school for granted, because there are a lot of things that you will learn in PT school that will matter at some point. And the most important thing of those is the basic sciences. So you want to go to a class? Sure. How are you doing in anatomy? How well do you know kinesiology? Can you draw a free body diagram cold of this particular movement? these things, well, it may seem hard to be applicable at the time, matter. And these are topics that I continually review upon because maybe I didn't appreciate that stuff as much. But what having a good basic science foundation allows you to have is it allows you to critically appraise concepts that you may learn once you're out of school. You should always be asking when you're attending a continuing education class, does this have biological plausibility? Well, how do you know if it has biological plausibility if you slept through your basic science and stuff? That's what it allows you to utilize when you're appraising new material. It also allows you to operate in scenarios in which maybe you don't have good evidence to perform an intervention, or maybe there's a condition that you're working with that there's not a lot of evidence to support any type of treatment, or maybe there is no treatment. How do you operate in that scenario? Well, you have to fall back on what kind of mechanisms, science-wise, can you alter or intervene upon with maybe treatments that aren't as well researched. So it helps you provide rationale for things you're going to do in the future. And it also helps you, teaches you to become a critical thinker, to become a good learner, to become an appraiser, because you have to have these concepts down pat. You want to be a clinician, not a technician. So make sure you have your basic sciences down. 1. Number 2, how are your evaluation skills? How is your understanding of pathology? Would you be able to screen someone who potentially has cancer? And what are those things that you would look at that maybe determine if someone has cancer? Do you know that cold? Well, if you don't, that's a problem. Because the very first rule of PT Club, besides don't talk about PT Club, is making sure that the person you're working with is someone you can actually help. And if you have someone who potentially has cancer or has a fracture or has some type of systemic illness, if you don't know what those signs and symptoms are, or you don't have screening procedures in place that help funnel those people to the right provider, you're going to hurt someone at the worst case. At the best case, you're going to do someone a disservice, or you're not going to be able to help them to the highest degree. So make sure you're paying attention in those pieces, because that's absolutely important. And again, that's maybe a spot that I won't say I neglected, but once I got out of my residency, which was very heavy in that field, I went to learning other things. I would definitely say my diagnostic skills got a little worse because I wasn't using that as much, because I wasn't thinking in that thought process. When I got into the NBA, because you see a lot more acute injuries, having those screening procedures in place becomes a lot more important. Those special tests do become a bit more special. And so you still, even though those skills may be used sparsely, you still have to understand how those work, when those are appropriate, because you will use them at some point. The last thing, and this is regarding Rhinoceros rexus treatment, which I'm going to laugh every time I say that, is, do you understand your enemy? Do you know the rationale behind all those treatments that maybe are a little bit more archaic? Do you know your history and whence you came from? Because all these things do matter. And I wouldn't say that you have to throw a lot of those treatments out completely, because in some cases they may be warranted. Maybe the only thing that your patient can tolerate is a grade 1 P to A to the spine. Well, if you slept through your orthopedics class, you wouldn't know how to do that. Now, do I think you need to know how to, can you try to palpate a specific level? I'm only going to P to A, C7 and not C6? No, I think that's absolute bullshit, and I think that's well researched that that's absolute bullshit. But that's where your critical appraisal skills come into play that you'll learn in your research class, and you've learned from understanding the basic sciences and understanding what it is we're doing from a manual therapy standpoint. But these skills can still be quite relevant, and I would make sure that you have a thorough understanding of at least what their thought process is behind it. And maybe you can counteract that thought process with a thought process of your own that seems to make sense based on what you've read in the research, based on some of the basic sciences that you've learned in PT school, these things. But it helps to understand someone else's thought process and framework, because you are going to want to be using those same critical processes when you are developing your own framework. And so use it as an exercise when you are building your own systems. And that is making sure you understand the systems that are in place in PT school and know where those holes are. Because if you can find holes in that system, and you've already done that once, it's going to be much easier to find holes in your system and where you need to alter things. So if you've done those three things, if you've killed basic sciences and you got them down pat, if your tests and measures are incredibly good, and if you understand the basic PT type skills, then, and only then, is it okay to take some outside classes. Because remember, the number one thing is you got to be able to pass your test, which I know is a terrible way to think of it from PT school, but if you can't pass the test, you won't be able to use any of the skills you may want to learn. But let's say you've done those three things, you've mastered your basic sciences, you're very good with all your testing, and you understand what they're trying to teach you in PT school, and you want to learn some other things. I am encouraging you to do so, because remember, PT school is there to help you pass the test. I don't think it necessarily prepares you to help people. That's what your clinicals are for. That's what your clinical experiences are for. But I don't think a lot of the skills that are taught in school can be helpful. I mean, I'm just trying to think of, if I had the thought process in which I learned in PT school, how effective I would be with the people who I'm working with. And I really don't know what the answer is. And I know for a lot of students who I speak to, or who I have mutual friends to, they have their struggles in the clinic. And they didn't really find success until they sought that outside learning. And so I do think that attending continuing education is important, especially if you're picking the clinical instructors you want to learn from. And so if you have an expert that you gravitate towards and you're going to set up a clinical affiliation with them, I would probably ask them first, hey, what type of skills would you like me to have before I go in? Because they may point you into particular classes to take. They may point you at books to read. They may point you at a lot of other areas to learn, which maybe you wouldn't have focused on otherwise, because those aren't the en vogue areas. So what classes would I take? I wrote a lot of some of my favorites in my post Continuing Education, The Complete Guide to Mastery, so I would definitely check out that post, and I'll link it in the show notes, because that has a lot of them. But what you want to think about is, what holes am I trying to fill in all of the categories that impact physical activity or movement? Because that's what we're really working on. And for me, I break down the qualities of movement into 4 categories. The first is knowledge. The second is variability. the third is power, and the fourth is capacity. And those are addressed typically in that order. And so first off, let's talk about knowledge. So does your patient have the requisite knowledge to perform movement safely and successfully? And I'll give you an example of someone who does not. Someone who thinks that every time they experience pain, they're damaging tissues. That is someone with a fault or inaccurate conception that may potentially limit their movement capabilities because, well, I don't want to move. This thing hurts and I'm hurting myself. I'm damaging my back every time I move. You want to break someone of that. And so what kind of things can I learn from a knowledge standpoint that will help with that? Well, that's where a lot of your pain science classes come into. And some of my favorites that I like to Explain Pain with David Butler. I like Therapeutic Neuroscience Education with Adrian Lowe. And I'll tell you what, anytime you can go see Lorimer Moseley chat or speak, please do so. Those would be my three guys who I would gravitate towards from a Con Ed standpoint. And I mean, I could give you a gang of books, but we'll just keep it to classes since that was Tyrannosaurus Rex's recommendation or question. So those would be things to address knowledge impairments. The second point is movement variability. And movement variability, I believe by the research standards, is being able to use multiple different strategies for the same task. And so, for example, every time you were to do a squat, no two squats would be the same. And so the more variability you have, generally to a degree, unless it's excessive variability, the better. The way I look at it is to maximize movement variability, I have to have the passive and active capability to move in three planes. And not only that, but be able to coordinate triplanar movement. And that's how I address variability in someone. And who would you go to learn about movement variability? Obviously, I have a lot of my background is in postural restoration. Those would be the people who I would recommend because they have most of the system figured out. I think that if you were going to take their classes, I would probably just go myokin, postural, pelvis, and impingement, and that will let you help a bulk of the people. I don't know if even though I've taken them multiple times, I don't know if I can necessarily recommend going up towards some of the cranial stuff. And the reason being is because it's kind of a crapshoot in terms of if it helps or not. And it's not incredibly well researched in the sense that there's a lot of trial and error. And I think it does something. I really do, especially being someone who's gone through and done those interventions. But it's just, I think that to what extent it helps individuals in a different category, we don't know. For me, I went there because I had neck pain. And what I got out of being treated by their program, the Prime program, was the ability to fully squat and the ability to do a single leg squat, a pistol. I've never been able to do that before until I went to that program. Did it help my neck pain necessarily? No. Do I have full shoulder range of motion? Hell no. But I would just be careful when you are going to those two classes. And not only that, and again, it's not that I'm saying that they're ineffective treatments, because I did achieve benefit from going there and getting those done. But I think a lot of people, when they're going on the movement variability train, they don't have the basics emphasized enough. I've seen a lot of patients recently from practitioners who I won't name who saw these people, and a lot of them couldn't get even some of the basic breathing stuff down without coaching. And so having that basic understanding, or having the basics down pat, help a large portion of the population, an incredibly large portion of the population. Even people who maybe have some other things influencing their movement capabilities. Maybe they have a bad bite. Well, maybe if you address the basics savagely well, you can work around that. And so I would take those courses from a movement variability standpoint. I'll tell you what, another plug for a lot of Bill Hartman's material and the people at iFast. I think that Bill is taking a lot of those concepts to another level, and some of the things that he's doing from a ribcage standpoint have really impacted my treatments for the better. And he may have some stuff on iFast University that goes over that, but I would definitely look into a lot of the stuff that he's doing, because I think he's taking the movement variability concept to a completely different level. Let's say you don't like either of those two things. The SFMA is probably your next best option in that regard. My only gripe with them is I think a lot of these are pattern driven, but a lot of the tests in the SFMA have nothing that looks at the frontal plane, which is important. I mean, you can't pick up frontal plane movement of joints by just looking at sagittal and transverse. That said, it's a systematic way to look at things, and I can immensely appreciate that. I use a lot of their movement strategies in terms of a treatment standpoint. I think those are quite good, so they do have my support in that regard. So those would be the ways that I would look at improving movement variability. Next step would be power, and so this would be, for me, being able to produce force. I would consider any of like the FMS offerings, categories that would help you in this regard, because they're going to teach you some of the basic movements and how to coach them. So squat, deadlift, single leg deadlift, all of these things. The FMS does that incredibly well. So I do like that system in that regard. Another thing to consider would be maybe anything that's kettlebell oriented. In fact, I'm really excited about this class that Jim Ewan's teaching. I think that's how you pronounce his name. In January, and I can put the link to that in the show notes. But just learning how to move under load is a very important thing. I learned a lot of that from my time in Bill, and then also working in the NBA with the Grizzlies. Eric Otter was a phenomenal mentor for me in that regard. But you need to learn. You need to learn loaded movements, learn how to perform them well, and learn how to progress them. And I think if you're going to look at a continuing education class, the best that I've seen so far has been the FMS level 2. So we'll get to that. In terms of capacity, which is the ability to produce force for extended periods of time, Joel Jamieson's a no-brainer here. I would definitely look at getting his book Ultimate MMA Conditioning, and I have his certified conditioning course. Reading through the manual has been really good. That's who I would look to for capacity type training. So those would be the 4 categories at which we can address movement. Obviously, one thing that I did leave out was manual therapy, and you will need that occasionally. To what extent, if you address the other categories, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. And I don't necessarily think that certain camps are better than others necessarily. I think when you're choosing manual therapy, you just have to go with whatever skill set you feel you can do really well at. And that's who I would choose to learn from, because you have to realize that we're likely operating under the same mechanisms regardless of technique, with maybe slight variations. That said, the way I break up my manual therapy learnings, and these would be the last things I would probably learn, because I think movement can get you really far. But I break manual therapy up into low intensity, moderate intensity, and high intensity of how stressful is this technique when once applied to a patient. And so low intensity might be just very superficial, skin-oriented kind of things. And I gotta give a shout out to my girl, Diane Jacobs, for dermoneuromodulation. I think that is a great systematic approach to doing a low intensity technique. And I found it to be very helpful in people who are very sensitive and maybe can't tolerate more moderate or high intensity techniques. So I would probably check some of her stuff out. I have her book, just thumbing through it. It looks really, really good. You may be able to even just get a lot of the techniques out of that. So that would be my low intensity technique that I would go for. In terms of a moderate intensity technique, these may be some of your joint mobs. I think ART fits here, and say what you will about ART. I love the class because it was a great anatomy review for me, and the technique is quick and effective. So I do like their stuff. Their only downsides, they are expensive as all hell, and I haven't talked myself into taking another one of their classes because of their price point yet. But it's definitely something I am considering. That would be like some of the moderate intensity techniques that I might push someone towards. In terms of the high intensity techniques, this might be joint manipulation, which I haven't really taken a formal course yet on that. I did a lot of it in my residency. I will say I like some of Spinal Manipulation Institute's work. I liked their extremity manipulation technique or class. I thought that was really well done. Got some good techniques that I use liberally with my patients. Well, not liberally, but when I need to. And it's been effective. So I've heard mixed things on their spinal manipulation classes specifically, but overall the reviews have been promising. So you might look towards them for that. In terms of the other high intensity technique that I might point someone towards would be dry needling. Again, who knows where we're at with the evidence. They list a lot of different things in terms of efficacy. I also see some people who, some research studies where they, like the toothpick study, for example, where they use toothpicks instead of acupuncture needles, and that was just as effective. I am probably somewhere in the middle camp, in the sense that some people want that stuff, and I have seen it to be effective in certain instances. And if you're going to learn dry needling, much as PT school, much as my rule for PT school, in terms of going somewhere cheap, get the cheapest route you can to be able to legally use needles. As of right now, that's the Spinal Manipulation Institute from what I've seen. And I enjoyed their classes. I thought Ray Butts did a phenomenal job explaining some of the basic sciences and the purported mechanisms of doing dry needling. So that was awesome enough for me. And we can throw research studies back and forth at one another, but I can tell you right now, not many classes that I take even have the research. Even many of the classes that I've taken don't even have a third of the research material that they provide. I think their manual is a joke. Number one, I had to draw my own dry needling manual for them, but I do think that it's the cheapest route to get into the needling world, and they teach a pretty good technique. So those would be the areas that I would look at from a manual therapy standpoint. In terms of non-manual stuff or things not unrelated, take something differential diagnosis if you can. And I probably should have put that very first thing. I love Bill Boysenall's course. I just don't think he's formalized it. So, but if you can get access to Bill Boysenall in his Art of Science and Medical Screening, I would definitely encourage you to take that. I think there's another differential diagnosis course being put on by Next Gen Institute. I'm probably going to take that once I leave the land of China. but that's another one that I'm looking into as well. So that's kind of a hole in my game, so to speak, that I'm trying to fill or at least refresh. So that's kind of my thoughts on going through physical therapy school. I think that's a good stopping point for today. So to summarize everything, when you're thinking about being a PT, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Make sure you go somewhere cheap, gets you out fast, allows you to pick your clinicals. Make sure you kill it in school, learn the material very well, have a good understanding, because you will refer back to a lot of stuff, you just don't know when. And then make sure you pick classes that address biomedical type stuff, like screening, movement variability, movement power, movement capacity, and of course knowledge of movement. Address all those areas, and you should be pretty solid. So I want to thank you guys for listening to this one. I'm sure you're wondering, where can I find more about you, Zach? Well, I'm glad you asked. So first off, check out my website, zaccupples.com. That's where I post all this stuff. You can also subscribe to my newsletter there. You get a free acute to chronic workload calculator, amongst other free things. Also, I offer services on that website. Let's say you want a mentor who wants to teach you some of the things that I talked about in this very podcast. I can be your guy for that. Go ahead and check out the services page on zaccupples.com. I also offer movement consultations if maybe you're not moving as well as you'd like to in 3 planes, or maybe you got a little bit of pain, you've tried some other people, it hasn't worked out, and you've been medically cleared that you don't have something serious. Come check me out. I can help you with that. Another thing, I do offer online personal training. You can check me out if you're someone who's needs to be helped post-rehab, if someone who's trying to increase their athletic performance, or someone who's dealing with fat loss. Those are probably the 3 areas I can help you with the best. Check me out on my services page at zaccupples.com. You can also hit me up on the Instagram, baby. Instagram, Zac, Zac Cupples, that's my handle. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, facebook.com/ZCouples, and then Twitter is twitter.com. My handle is at Z Cupples. That's how you can get a hold of me. You can also subscribe to me on my YouTube channel. You just search Zac Cupples, you'll be able to find me. But I think it's youtube.com/user/Couples Performance. But that's way long. Just search Zac Cupples and subscribe there. Otherwise, you beautiful people, stay classy, keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Audio deuces.